Welcome to Mighty Banyans on the Bay.
New College Faculty Conversations.
I'm Douglas Estes, Associate Professor of Religion at New College of Florida.
I'm Alicia Mercado-Harvey, Assistant Professor of Spanish and History at New College of Florida.
And I'm Bruce Gilley, Presidential Scholar in Residence here at the New College. This is where we will talk to the amazing faculty of the New College of Florida, their personal stories, what they teach, and the research they're doing and why it matters, as well as their advice for today's college students.
So join us each week during the semester for thought-provoking dialogues with these fascinating scholars here in the Pompeii Room on our beautiful campus by the bay in sunny Sarasota, Florida.
We invite you to watch and listen, send your comments and questions, and get to know New College of Florida, the honors college of the State University system. And don't forget,
Go Mighty Banyans!
This is our second edition. My name is Alicia Mercado-Harvey, Professor of Spanish and History.
And my name is Dr. Bruce Gilley. I am the Presidential Scholar in Residence here at the New College. And we are very happy to have with us today Dr. Samantha Levell, who is Assistant Professor of Biology here at the New College. Welcome, Dr. Levell.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about your background. We would like to know how you got into your field.
Yeah, thank you for asking and thank you for having me. So I actually am a Florida resident, more specifically a Sarasota resident and native. So I actually grew up in this area. I always loved the ocean and everything in it. I would catch fish as a child, and I always sort of had this innate interest in fish. And so then I volunteered at Mote Marine. I was an intern with them in high school. I had a really close bond to this area. But I ended up going to Florida State for my undergraduate, hoping to do marine biology. But as it turns out, I got there and it was more biology focused. And then went on and did my PhD at the University of California, Riverside, focusing on fish sort of the whole way. I also had a visiting appointment in Oregon, learned a lot about West Coast biology, West Coast fishes. And then when this opportunity popped up again in an area that was so close to me, I was so excited. They were looking for a visiting assistant professor of fish biology, which I hardly knew anybody would want something that specific. So it was so exciting. I came here and I just fell in love. I fell back in love with a place that I already loved. But just the resources at New College were incredible. The faculty were incredible. The students were incredible. And so then when this position opened as an assistant professor of marine biology, I jumped on it.
It sounds like if you want to be a marine biologist, you need to study at a school that's close to water. Is that always the case?
That's such a good question. Absolutely not. However, the fact that we are situated right in Sarasota Bay makes it so that in an hour-long class period, we can go out there and hop in the water and get our toes wet and actually get in depth. So it makes it so that it's much more accessible to us. And then when I have a 3-hour classroom period, we're out there on the boat, we're out sampling across the bay, and we just have so many more things available to us because we are on the water.
So since you're a Sarasota resident, which is really cool, so you were aware of New College, right? Did you visit it before? Did you ever consider coming here?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really wasn't a school that I was very aware of, actually. Oddly enough, I did have friends who ended up going here, but I was just in the mindset of, I have to go to a larger state school. It never was apparent to me that there were these types of schools. I didn't know what a liberal arts college was until I was in college myself, which isn't, it's embarrassing to say a little bit that now I teach at a liberal arts and embrace the liberal arts education, but I really wasn't aware of it.
We should really call it a liberal arts and sciences education, right? Because this is an old term of arts, but arts really meant arts, sciences, now social sciences as well.
And I agree with that because I definitely heard liberal arts and thought just arts. And so I thought, I have to go somewhere else if I want to pursue a science education, which, it's unfortunate that was the case.
And how has been your hands-on now that you are into this liberal arts college? How is expectation meeting reality?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to teach at a smaller institution in that Oregon appointment. And that's when I realized that having these intimate class sizes, right, where the ratio of students to faculty is so much different than at these larger institutions, the opportunities for students, I think, is what's really spectacular about the liberal arts education, is that like I said, I can round up my students on the boat. A boat only holds 13 people, right? That doesn't mean that I can do that with a class of 40. So in terms of expectations versus reality, it's exceeded my expectations in so many ways because the interactions I can have with the students are so fantastic, and the students are accessible. Our students live on campus. So, sometimes it's like, well, does anybody want to go to the aquarium on the weekend instead of trying to fit it into class time? Everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm already here. So, maybe it's not the best for work-life balance, but it is a really good opportunity for students and faculty.
So tell us a little bit about what you're teaching, what you expect to teach while you're here.
Yeah, I am so excited about the courses that I teach here because New College allows its faculty to create courses. So for example, I teach fish biology. Fish biology is a course that's taught at many schools, especially those that offer marine programs. However, I also teach a course called Fish Behavior Laboratory, which is virtually unheard of. And I say that with confidence because I tried to figure out how other people teach it, right, so that I can inform my own pedagogy. And it doesn't exist. It might exist at the graduate level, but not the undergraduate. And so what it allows us to do is to create these intensely focused courses that students, A, wouldn't get anywhere else, and B, they absolutely adore it. Like, we had so much fun in that class.
Fish behavior, tell us more about that.
Yeah.
I've got too many questions going on.
Right, I know, fish behavior, again, hyper-specific. So a lot of colleges offer animal behavior, and we're no exception. Animal behavior teaches you about the cognition of animals, why they behave certain ways, what kinds of environmental pressures cause them to behave and cause their populations to respond and change. And so what I did is I took sort of a template of that type of course and just applied it to fish. If we're interested in personality, let's study fish personality this week, which, by the way, is a thing. They absolutely have personalities. How do fish communicate? What is their feeding behavior? How is it different from species to species? So we can ask all of the same questions through a fish lens.
So are you involved at all into, because we have, right, a program here, a master's program, and people who are experts, since you brought up, animal behavior like Heidi and Gordon Bauer, the institution and New College. So any interactions in that regard?
Yeah. It's interesting because while the master's program is technically separate from undergraduate, we still interact in a lot of ways. So for example, we can have graduate students as teaching assistants in our undergraduate classes, which allows for immediate overlap of ideas, of collaboration. It's really nice to have these types of programs on our same campus. So even though I'm not specifically involved in the master's program, I still direct students towards it. I still collaborate with the faculty that are in it.
Fantastic.
Now, tell us a little bit about your research. I know that Alicia and I have both looked at your research, and we've got a lot of questions about the research. It's very interesting, even to people who have a limited aspect of science. But tell us about your research.
Thank you for asking about my research. So you might be able to tell by a lot of the things that I've said. And I do want to also qualify. I do teach classes outside of fish classes. I teach some ecology type classes and marine classes. But you might be able to gather that I do research fish biology. So I research fish biology in two different realms, both because of my passions and because I really want students to be able to work with me in whatever capacity they're interested in. So I have a really strong research background in a freshwater fish species known as Heterandria formosa is the scientific name, but the common name is the least killifish, which I don't love to use because it's a little offensive, the least of the killifishes. And they're not actually even a killifish by taxonomic definitions. But anyway, that fish is really incredible. It's incredible for a couple reasons. One, it's about the size of my pinky knuckle. They're like an inch maximum. They're very small, but they also have a human-like placenta. So not only do they give live birth, but they provision or they give resources to their embryos as they develop directly, just like a mammal does. And they have a cool feature called superfetation. Superfetation means, I'm going to give you the science definition first, then an easy analogy, that they gestate embryos in different developmental stages simultaneously. The equivalent in a human would be having a baby that is 1 month gestation, 3 months gestation, 5 months gestation, 7 months, and 9 months, such that you give birth every few months, except in this fish, it's every few days.
That sounds fishy. Okay, sorry. That's my only fish joke. I'm not going to do that again.
Right? But it's an incredible fish species that has allowed me to do a lot of research, and I'm continuing to do research on them because they're so great. They're small, easy to keep, easy to find, all of those things. Plentiful. I should also clarify, they are not in any sort of danger. And then in this ocean side, I research sygnathids, which are seahorses and pipefish. Very charismatic little fish, but people don't generally know a whole lot about them. And so in that work, I'm bringing students into the field every month and doing censusing and sampling, figuring out how healthy their populations are and individuals are in different places. So I kind of research these two very different realms, and I'm not really willing to give up either one of them. So it does make my life more complicated, but I also like the opportunities that it grants students.
That sounds fascinating. I was looking at your website where you have all the information about seagrass, right, and seahorses.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to ask you because, most people know these days that we're having a problem with plastic in the oceans and, all this habitats that are, in danger. So I was just wondering if you could tell us specifically how does all this pollution affect, this particular population?
Yeah, that's such a good question because fish are interesting in that they can migrate generally. Seahorses and pipefish can't. Neither can seagrass, right? It can't pick up and leave when the waters aren't very good. I'm involved in another research project on sharks that looks at do they leave when there's red tide or do they stay and are they resilient to it? Pipefish and seahorses, we can say with confidence, they do not move very fast. Their swimming speed has been referred to in bathtub lengths before, that, in 5 minutes they might be able to get across one bathtub length. So they're not going anywhere when conditions are bad. And so that allows us to use these seagrass beds. And not only, there's a lot of people who study seagrass and make sure that those populations are doing fine. So what I'm looking at is this tiny fish and seeing how does the health of the overall seagrass affect this fish and what can the seagrass beds tell us about this fish. So more completely, we're looking at, seasonal variation and when there's a lot of epiphytes on the seagrass, or what some people might say is like junk that stops the seagrass from photosynthesizing. How does that affect the seahorse and pipefish populations? We take abiotic data. We take, dissolved oxygen and temperature and salinity. How do all of these things affect them? And something I might talk about a little bit later is we recently had a pass reopen and it completely smothered all the seagrass beds. And so what we can study is, okay, now the seagrass is gone, we have this really cool place to look at to see how fast does it come back and when do the pipefish come back? Because again, they're not going to be coming from far and wide. It's going to be a much slower recovery for them.
So kind of perfect natural experiment, right? Just kind of appearing as a result of a fluke.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about fish and biology generally. I mean, everyone has to specialize in something, but obviously, as you say, you have to teach general biology classes. Some of your students here may be interested in chimpanzees or the bark on the trees. So how do you connect your research to your teaching? How do you find kind of more general lessons from fish to apply to the field of biology?
Yes. And that is something that I really, really focus on in my classes is transferable skills. I want to teach my students how to properly build and test a hypothesis, right? And so even though we use fish, right, because they're here, because I know them very well, they're easy to use, I want all of the things that we learn about them to transfer very easily to other projects. And I do find that, I attract students who maybe they're like, all I care about is bivalves, is I just want to do clams and mussels. Why should I take this course on pipefish? Well, because first of all, we're going out where those other organisms are. And because the skills that you're learning here are very easy to transfer to those other passions.
On that note, don't forget next week's Clam Bake on the Beach fundraiser. I'm sorry, that sounds wrong, but you did mention clam, so I put it in the plug.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I'd like to ask you, since we're talking about your research, how does your research in particular inform your teaching on the courses that you're currently or that you're planning to teach in the future?
Yeah. So I think that really plays into a lot of what New College allows faculty to do, which is incorporate their research into their curriculums. Now, I will say that that tends to have a negative connotation. I've heard people say before, oh, this professor, all they do is teach us about their research and all these concepts and how their research, combines into it. I try and do it in a much looser fashion that, this is where I conduct my research, but here's all of the things that we can learn about this area in addition to what I do. So the research informs the teaching. It gives me new field sites to bring students to. It opens me up to collaborators that I wouldn't have known about if I hadn't done it. So for example, I'm now in touch a lot more with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission and their Fisheries and Wildlife Research Institute. Those are people that I got in touch with for my seahorse and pipefish work. But now when I have students interested in government jobs, they're the people that I contact and say, let's go visit these people and look at their lab, even though that connection was established differently.
Now, this is a family-oriented podcast, but I cannot resist asking Dr. Levell about her latest research article, which can get a little racy. So, warning to the kids in the room, maybe go watch Nemo right now. Here's the title: Can females differentially allocate resources to offspring sired by different males? Unquote. Notice there's no mention of species there, but this is about fish. And here's my reading of it, and you can tell us. The question is, do some mothers give more or less attention to different offspring based on the fact that the offspring may have come from different fathers? And I think the answer that you guys find is yes, but I'm all ears.
And yes, but is actually the perfect answer to that, right? So interestingly, there's a lot of animals in the animal kingdom that can have broods or litters that are sired by different males. A perfect example is cats. It's the reason why you can have cats, a mother give birth to kittens that are black and orange and brown and all these different colors, because those females have sperm from multiple different males that they can either hold on to, like these fish do. They can actually hold on to sperm for 9 months and just fertilize these embryos as those eggs come forth. So what we have is a really interesting question of, we have sexual selection in the pre-copulatory realm or the before mating realm. We have males fight for females. In some species, we have females fight females for males. It basically is any version that you can imagine happens somewhere in nature. And in this species of fish, the males don't fight each other for females. They actually just copulate with the females. They find a female, they deliver sperm to the female, and then she goes on her merry way and he goes on his merry way. However, you have a female with many different males stored essentially that she can use to fertilize embryos. So that means that if there is to be competition between males, it's happening after they've mated with the females. And that might be an oversimplification a little bit, but to me, it begs the question of, does she have any say in what goes on with her embryos? Can she say, this baby is getting this much from me and this baby is getting this much from me? So what we did is we found 2 populations of the same species. Same species is really important. This population here, let's call it A, makes really big babies. And I won't bore you with the details for why, but we have good reasons for why. Huge babies. Population B, tiny babies. When you mate big baby males to small baby mothers, they struggle and they make really big babies, and it's costly to them, it's exhausting for them, it's not good. When you do the reciprocal cross and you have a big baby mother and a small baby father, she just kind of keeps making big babies. So it's not really clear who's determining how big those babies become. So we used artificial insemination actually, and we mixed sperm between the small baby fathers and the big baby fathers. And we provided it to the females, and what we found was really interesting, because when you only give her the one male, if this male makes big babies, she makes big babies. And again, it's hard for her, it's not good. But when you give her both, big baby, small baby, those big baby males don't get their big babies anymore. They get smaller babies or intermediate sized babies. So what we found is that when she's given a choice between fathers, she can restrict the amount of resources that those offspring are essentially asking for. This is happening in a genetic realm, but those babies are essentially saying, I'm hungry, feed me.
When they're still inside.
When they're still inside. I know it's a wild concept. We don't know how that works, but we know that it's happening. And so we find that she can restrict certain males' offspring, but only when she has those small baby fathers in there too, who aren't as demanding. So it's a little bit of a complicated result, but it implies that females have some ability to restrict the resources they give to their embryos.
And the term I saw in the paper, which I love, post copulatory female choice.
Yes.
Got that, kids? Remember that term.
There's your lesson for the day.
So on the populations, because you're studying this, in the ocean, and I imagine you have your aquariums here where you
A whole room of them.
Exactly. How you're conducting all this research. So how are you seeing this population affected, as I was saying, with changes in the environment, like oceans being warmer, more pollution, all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's worth clarifying that this is sort of separate from that freshwater fish. So the tiny fish, they live in lakes and rivers, and they certainly have environmental effects. But the main ones that we focus on when it comes to a changing environment, like if there's pollution or temperature changes or salinity changes or more intense storms, all of those types of things, that's where we're more interested in looking at the seahorses and pipefish responding to that. So would you mind repeating your question? Sorry, I went off on my clarification.
The ocean fish are
The ocean fish.
rather than freshwater fish
Right.
that draw more attention when it comes to climate change.
Absolutely. Yeah, because the ocean's changing. The oceans are much more likely to change on the scale that we're talking about. So lakes and rivers, they're, embedded in the ground really well. They're very local environments. So to heat a lake up based on the outside air temperature is going to take a lot more than an ocean will. So oceans.
Yeah, so oceans. So what I was basically going to, asking in the question is like, what is happening, particularly to the seagrass, right? In relation to, because they're the food for this fish.
Right.
How is all that ecosystem
Yes.
being affected?
And that is a surprisingly complicated question. And I sort of defer, if anybody's interested in this, I would point you towards the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, because they're the pioneers in studying our seagrass beds. And we have another professor here at New College, Dr. Gerardo Toro Farmer, who uses drones to study the seagrass beds, as well as deploy equipment to look at the nutrient levels and water quality. So I'm not necessarily the expert in that area. However, what I've seen from the seahorse and pipefish populations is that, first, they're very seasonally affected, which is an interesting concept to tease apart in the data. But in the length of time that I've been here, we haven't seen massive pollution outpours. We have seen some pretty strong storms, and we have seen that large changes in salinity seem to impact the fish communities, in that when you get a big storm that comes in and it brings a lot of rain, it makes the water quite fresh, and the fish are resilient to that for a little bit. But then the next time we go out and sample, they're gone.
So
And it takes some time to come back.
follow-up question on that. So the frequency of hurricanes, we just had Milton, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sure this had, an effect, a big effect on this. The frequency also, because it's not just having this huge hurricane that hit us directly, but also how frequent they're happening. Is that having an impact?
Yeah, so the problem with hurricanes is that they are typically linked to algae blooms, and one of the more painful algae blooms for us is Karenia brevis that causes red tide. So red tide can be caused by excess nutrients in the water. Two ways that happens. So addition of fresh water, that fresh water can cause nutrients and overturn in the water to be a problem. But storm surges are also a big issue, because when that seawater goes onto land and then washes back into the ocean, it's bringing with it all of the gross things, all of that oil that, spilled on your driveway, all of that kind of stuff is getting washed back in. And so there's sort of a twofold impact from excess freshwater offlow, and also the impacts directly of sewage that go back into the water that can impact from hurricanes. And we've seen both this season, right? It was Debbie that was just a massive amount of fresh water. And that's when I said that it got really fresh, the fish were fine, and then they weren't. And then Milton is where we're seeing, we see a lot of E. coli in the water after storms, a lot of things that we don't really want to be in the water. So yeah, there's a couple different ways that we look at it. And then with the pass reopening, that's just a whole different issue, because now the hydrology is changing.
What is the pass reopening?
Oh, yes. So what I'm referring to there is Midnight Pass, which, if you're a Sarasota loco, you might have heard of that term before. Long story short, in the 80s, it was a pass, meaning that water from the Gulf was able to enter into Midnight Pass, or an area of water between the two barrier islands. And there was somebody who didn't like that during storms his house kept getting eroded. So he said to the county, can I open the pass? Or can I close the pass? And the county said, sure, as long as you find some sort of remediation strategy. So he said, okay, he closed the pass, and then he said, I'm out of money. And so then we had an unnatural occurrence, right? We had a closed off pass. And so since then, people have wanted that pass reopened because that was its natural state. Now the science said, well, even though it's closed off and the hydrology and the water flow has changed, it's kind of okay. The fish are still there. We have a nursery habitat. We have seagrass. So the scientists have said, maybe we don't need to reopen it, but there's been consistent council meetings to figure out what maybe could be done to restore flow. Milton said the pass is open now. It was solved naturally in that Helene temporarily opened the pass a little bit, and then Milton just came through and blew it wide open. And so that has really changed the water flow in that area. I brought my students there a couple days ago. We were going there to sample the seagrass. There is no more seagrass in this area where there were, maybe a mile of solid, beautiful seagrass beds is now sand. And so like that, all of the seagrass is gone. That does mean that all of the pipefish are gone and all the seahorses are gone, but, this was the natural state here. So I actually feel conflicted because I was there this summer and I was collecting all these really cool fish species that are now just gone. But it also allows for this really cool new avenue of research that looks at how quickly does seagrass come back, how quickly do samanthas come back, and how many students can I go out there? Yeah.
How many students can you get on a New College boat?
Exactly.
It seems to me that being a scientist these days has got to be challenging because you learn a certain amount doing your PhD, of course, but as we all know, as professors, you never have learned enough. You always need to keep learning. And in the sciences, you're going to need to know not just your biology, but you're going to need to know your chemistry, your ocean sciences, you're going to need to know your physics. You're probably going to need to know some pretty good computer modeling techniques. There just seems like a growing array of skills that you need to know just to do marine biology about fish anymore. So how do you keep up with all that?
I think that can be overwhelming to so many people, and I think that it can actually turn away a lot of people who otherwise I think would make really great scientists, to be perfectly honest. And when I look back at myself, I was incredibly naive, and I just thought, I have to take all of those classes. Okay, why not? And I went through and I got through it, and, it's a bit like a ball rolling down a hill getting through it, but I got through. And so I have mixed feelings on it because I really do think that the skills you learn in all of those different sciences really do sort of complete you as a marine biologist. But I also understand that they cause a lot of stress for students and they can be a deterrent. So I wish that there was a way to sort of, I guess right now here on this podcast, I can tell people that those accompaniments will teach you skills that will make you a better marine biologist, and that learning all of those other sciences will really strengthen you as a scientist. And hopefully, if you want to be a marine biologist or even a biologist in general, you realize that those are necessary components of that journey.
So we're segueing into this last section here as we have a few minutes left. We want to ask you about your advice for students considering the new college, students just considering the sciences and biology and whatnot. It must be, as you say, daunting. I mean, how would you help them to prepare and get interested and maybe even consider the new college?
Yeah. So my first pitch for new college is that your teachers, your instructors, your professors are incredibly accessible. And they're here because they value the liberal arts education, which implies that you have really good access to your professors. You can talk to them when you're struggling. You have other students who you can rely on, and that the journey is not yours to take on alone, and that there are people here who support you and want you to succeed. So that's the first bit of advice I have. What was your other question?
Well, that was my question.
Okay.
Yeah. So, as we look towards what someone watching this might be interested in being in touch with you and coming to the new college studying biology, Dr. Mercado-Harvey, you also have had experience recruiting students here. You're in the humanities, I'm in the social sciences, you're in the sciences. We all have a different experience here in attracting students, but we all in some ways have a different reason for being here as well.
Yeah.
And you have a boat, so that's kind of special.
I was going to say, I would add on that I believe that New College has an unbelievable amount of resources for its students. I can't speak to the other divisions because obviously I'm very natural science focused. But when I went to FSU, we had a marine lab that was an hour away. And I did some courses there. You know, I drove that hour, I spent some time there, and they were fantastic courses. They were my favorite courses. If I went here, I'd be able to have my favorite courses every semester, right? Because we have these facilities, we have the people, we have the resources. We have an entire marine lab where students can set up tanks, they can do projects, they can work with professors who are really passionate about what they study. And that, you know, when you're looking at colleges and when you're thinking about the college experience, honestly, research might not be at the top of your list. And I completely understand that. And I'm obviously very much like, when you want to get into research, that's when you come to me. As far as the rest of the New College experience, I mean, we have a gorgeous campus. We have fantastic living spaces, and we have a whole waterfront. Students can check out kayaks and paddleboards. They can learn to sail, all for free. So they have that amazing support outside of their classes. And then, you know, when it's time for you to think about research, which you do have to, because you have to do a thesis of some sort, that's when you can come to me and my colleagues, because we're waiting for you to get to that point. So you don't need to be worrying about that right away. If you want to, that's great. But there's a lot more here than just the incredible faculty.
And I think that you made a really good point on liberal arts, that we really are all about that, you know, for the students to have this one-on-one interaction that's very important. And in the sciences in particular, I can imagine how enriching that is when there's all this things that you need to be very, you know, knowledgeable about, and having a professor that you can pick the brain out and explain you things one-on-one, it's just fantastic. So
yeah, I love that. And I have students stop me all the time to ask questions, you know, after class, before class, when they see me in the hallways. They'll see me in my office, you know, even though it's not during office hours, I'll get a little, you know, nervous wave of, can I come in? And the answer is always yes, because I am here to promote your education and your career as a scientist, if that's something you're interested in. And if it's not, I'm still here, you know?
This has been a great conversation, Dr. Levell. Thanks for joining us today. I would say don't rent the leaky canoe when you go to rent the boats, but everything else she has told you is absolutely true about the New College. This has been a super illuminating discussion. You will see a link in the podcast to Dr. Levell's email. Feel free to contact her directly. We'll also post a link to that article that she just published for your interest. Thanks for joining us today. And as we always say at the end of our podcast, Go Mighty Banyans!